Come back to me, Sidolphus. I need you. Think of all the things we can create together. The world that we can build.
You need me? Your king needs me. I'm all for building a new world. Just not his. What made you think you had to sacrifice who you were to get what you wanted?
Sacrifice. I use my talents to my advantage, and you would tell me there is shame in that?
If there's no shame, then why do you feel so sorry for yourself?
A rousing speech, Lord Commander. I was a fool to believe you might have changed. The only person I feel sorry for is you! I can't do this anymore. If you would stand between our liege and his dream, then you leave me no choice. Goodbye, Sidolphus.
Hello, my name is Houston, and this is Media Mood Board. Yes, that's right. My name is Houston, and this is Media Mood Board, a weekly show about hyper-specific entertainment lists. So, you've played 2023's Final Fantasy 16. Or maybe you watched somebody play it. Or you don't know that much about it, but you just heard the concept, thought it sounded fun, but don't want to play the game. You want more. What should you pick up next? This will be a quick, simple video outlining some supplemental reading, books, movies, games you might want to try out to complement the themes and gameplay of Final Fantasy 16. I'll be marking the chapters below, so if there is a certain medium that you're trying to look for, feel free to just skip ahead to that one. Before we jump in, I just want to get the super obvious ones out of the way. During the pre-production of Final Fantasy 16, the entire team was given a box set of Game of Thrones, the TV show, and a copy of the video game God of War 2018. Final Fantasy 16 is also an earth tone fantasy drama that deals with like political intrigue, has long discussions of historical movements of troops on a map, but still has the blockbuster page-turnery vibes that Game of Thrones does. God of War 2018 is a video game about an old man who is a god. He's this ex-soldier who is just going up a mountain to spread his wife's ashes while kind of running away from his past and being forced to confront it. The way that it integrates gameplay and storytelling is a similar approach to what we see in Final Fantasy 16. These would not be my personal go-tos as far as companion pieces to Final Fantasy 16, but they're in discussion a lot, and they are literal inspirations for the game, so I wanted to get those out of the way first. They will definitely scratch a certain itch for you. But what do I think are things that would really do well to pair with this game? If you are looking for the vibe of the Final Fantasy 16 world, but something that's more fully fleshed out, that explores a lot more elements, I'm going to recommend The Poppy War. Final Fantasy 16 tells the story of a soldier who gains the powers of this demigod named the Phoenix. And as he goes on this journey, he has to deal with the realities of war and the nature of the world that he lives in. The Poppy War is a story about a girl that goes to a soldier academy, ends up becoming a shaman for a demigod called the Phoenix, and has to deal with the realities of war and the nature of the world that she lives in. Now, Final Fantasy 16 is really interested in fate. That's an element that Poppy War is not that interested in. But it really does expand on the fantasy elements that Final Fantasy 16 leaves unanswered. The demigods' relationships to their vessels. The effect that using a god's powers have on the vessels. The effect that the magic has and these vessels have on the earth. Most of these are treated as kind of just empty, plotty world things in Final Fantasy 16, but are fully explored in Poppy War. Poppy War also deals very graphically with the realities of war, especially when you have something that is you become a human weapon of mass destruction, essentially. Something that Final Fantasy 16 isn't really interested in. A town could be leveled in Final Fantasy 16, and as long as it was the good guys who did it, the team doesn't care about the repercussions. If you like the community building story of Final Fantasy 16 between these outcasts who have special abilities, I would recommend the Patternmaster series. This is a series of books that chronicles the different generations of this group of telepaths across centuries. Once again, the series engages in the ways that powers and abilities and being in contact with greater things affects their users or vessels in ways that Final Fantasy doesn't. So if you're looking for a little bit more of a deep dive on that, this is a really interesting place to explore that as well. Building a community of Magic users is on paper a huge part of Final Fantasy 16. But it's never explored in the depth that it does in the Patternmaster series. If you only read one book in the series, I would make that Mind of My Mind. It's more of a coming-of-age book, and I think matches best with Final Fantasy 16. If you're looking for something that deals a little bit more with possession by a godlike creature, but maybe in a more nitty-gritty type of way, I'd recommend the comic book Preacher. It's this Western noir brutal action comic that is about a Southern pastor who gets possessed by this godlike creature, and he, a vampire, and his ex-girlfriend, who is now a criminal, go off to fight unholy terrors. This delves into more of the religious angle, obviously, and it hasn't aged super well, but it is a really colorful, interesting world that explores what happens when you come in contact with fate and forces that are beyond your own. My number one recommendation for movies is I think that the Planet of the Apes reboot series provides a really interesting companion to Final Fantasy XVI. It's an exploration of exile and community building among a group of superior creatures, and the birth of that, and then the infighting that later comes in, and then how they end up interacting with outside communities. Final Fantasy XVI tries to deal with class, but it's not really very nuanced. This provides a more in-depth look in a fantasy setting like Final Fantasy XVI, gives a little bit more details of the two parties than we see in Final Fantasy XVI, as well as explores some of the infighting that would occur as if we were to follow this community that Clive ends up being a part of into the far, far future. What would it look like if there's a struggle for power? Those type of things. If I was to recommend one movie from the series, I would say Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. This one takes place after the ape community has kind of started and deals with some of the power struggles in there within the ape community as well as with humans. I think it is the strongest one in the series, but I also think that it parallels best kind of some of the themes that are talked about in Final Fantasy 16. If you're looking for something that maybe explores the idea of fate a little bit more, I would recommend Exterminating Angel. A group of rich partygoers go to this house party, and as the night is winding down, they find out that they're physically unable to leave the living room. They just can't. Their mind won't let them do it. They're forced to either accept that they're never going to leave this living room or figure out a way to break their fate and get out of there. If you're looking for a story about eco-terrorists and it paints a more full picture of the group of people that are a part of it in a way that Final Fantasy 16 tries but never fully gets to, I'd recommend How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Now, let's say you're just like, listen, buddy, I just played a game. I'm looking for other games like it. The obvious go-to would be Final Fantasy VII Remake. Not only is this another contemporary Final Fantasy game that has a similar combat system, Final Fantasy VII is more complex mechanically, but it also is another Final Fantasy game that is directly addressing the theme of fate, as it looks at the game that it is remaking and kind of has a conversation with the idea of remakes in general. Playing the two games and comparing their approach to how the gameplay and story tackle fate and what you think works and doesn't work is a fun exercise. You could also play Divinity Original Sin 2, a top-down D&D style Western RPG. Select the character Loesch. She is a bard who gets possessed by an evil spirit. You can either play her yourself or choose her as one of your companions to see her story. The game utilizes her possession in an interesting way, which ties directly into gameplay. Because she's possessed by an evil spirit, you sometimes won't get the choice of what to do, and the spirit will take over, or all of your options will change based on the spirit's mood or where you are, etc., etc. Compare Final Fantasy XVI's approach to someone who is gathering these spirits or gathering these gods or powers amongst them, and the approach that they take in Divinity Original Sin 2. Did you dig the curse aspect of Final Fantasy XVI that affected the magic users the more they used magic? While this is never actually a threat to Clive in Final Fantasy XVI, two other games that explore a similar idea are Hellblade, which threatens at the beginning that you have a curse, and the more times that you die, the further that curse will spread to the point where if you die too many times, it is permadeath and you have to start over. Or the FromSoft game Sekiro, in which the more you die, the more a curse spreads, which prevents you from doing certain side quests. Final Fantasy XVI treats Clive's ability to call upon the Phoenix in a similar way to one of its inspirations, God of War 2018. You fill up a bar, and then when it gets filled, you can activate it and utilize that power until it's gone. This is treating your power locally, but what if it was viewed globally? I would point you to Breath of Fire, Dragon Quarter. You also have access to special abilities in Breath of Fire, but the more that you use those, it adjusts a counter that is global and shown throughout the whole game, and once it reaches too high, you die and are forced to start over. However, that is built into the experience. The game is not supposed to be finished in one go. Much like a game like Hades more contemporarily, it is a game that is meant to be played multiple times until you get to the true ending. In my Final Fantasy XVI review video, I talked about how there are kind of two types of missions that you do. Soldier missions and then community building missions. Final Fantasy XVI has a very streamlined verbiage, which really complements the fighting, but when you do anything that's not fighting, it feels like those verbs are forced on it. If you're looking for a game that's full of fighting verbs, but its side quests are full of equally interesting integrated verbs, then I would recommend Yakuza 0. A game known for its weird, specific, bespoke mechanics for all sorts of interesting interactions in the world. Compare if you like the minimalist approach of Final Fantasy XVI or the maximalist approach of Yakuza 0. And finally, Final Fantasy XVI is staunchly uncustomizable. It focuses on a single character rather than a traditional party like in an RPG, and it truly is a role-playing game. The verbs are so specifically a warrior, so specifically Clive, that there's no doubt that you're not role-playing yourself in the game. It is a thumb-printed Clive. A game that I think takes this approach to role-playing, very much playing the role of a pre-established authored character, is Red Dead Redemption 2. The verbs and adverbs of the game are so defined by the lead character, it turned a lot of people off the game. Add on that this is a story about a loner who is a part of a community that is outside the law, that is trying to build this, and that you learn about these community members more through the side quests. You have a very healthy companion piece to Final Fantasy XVI, based in the Old West. Well, I hope you found something in here you liked, or that inspires you to go down some path of thought to find the next thing that you want to play, read, or watch. If you liked what you saw here, you can follow Media Moodboard on letterboxd, Goodreads, or just here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back next week with another hyper-specific entertainment list. My name is Houston. This is Media Moodboard. Bye.